Like so many, pastors and preachers in churches, they preach the lordship of Jesus, and that is absolutely crucial. But as soon as you do that, you need to preach the goodness of the lordship of Jesus. All of us will submit to an authority. The only question is whether or not that authority leads to our good and to our flourishing. And it's making a case that actually Christianity does do that.
Hi, and welcome to the Expositors Collective Podcast, episode 125. I'm your host, Mike Neglia. Hey, the episode you're about to listen to is an interview that I did with Pastor Mark Smith from City Church, Dublin, and it's kind of vintage. This interview took place in the summer of 2018, so this is more than 2 years old, and I've had it saved on my hard drive ever since then, and here's the reason why. The audio quality is not great. It's from the very early days of the podcast. It's done on a pretty cheap microphone, and it's done in a very large, echoey room. So all that kind of conspires together to make the audio quality not that great. Now, I've taken this file and I've sent it to 2 different audio engineers and said, what can you do to improve it? So it's been improved as much as possible, but I don't want this to only sit on my hard drive because the conversation that me and Mark had was so enjoyable, so instructive that I really want you to be able to hear it. So in this conversation, we speak about, so many things, primarily being able to understand the heartbeat and the passions, the idols and the aspirations of the cities that God has called us to preach to. Mark has a deep and realistic love and view of his city, which is Dublin. And so we speak about ways to understand a city, ways to not only exegete a text, but also to exegete a culture. And so it's important that we're not only preaching the truth, but we're also communicating in true ways to our congregations and to our hearers. Well, hey, on that note, that brings me to your invitation to our webinar. So September 19th, 5 p.m. Irish time, 9 a.m. California time, and you'll have to do the math to figure out what it is in your local time. But we're having our second ever Expositors Collective webinar, and our special guest for this one is Ryan Hughley. He's going to be speaking to us about addressing the heart. And so, you know what? I'm going to allow him to speak to you himself and to invite you, and I'll chime in at the end with some ways that you can do so.
Hey friends, my name is Ryan Hughley, and I'm the founding and lead pastor of Ridgeline Church in Salt Lake City, Utah, and the author of 8 Hours or Less, Writing Faithful Sermons Faster. I'm so honored to be teaching the next Expositors Collective webinar on September 19th from 9 to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. You know, we are all right in the midst of what may just end up being one of the most challenging seasons of life and pastoral ministry in our generation. The combination of COVID, economic instability, the isolation that we have experienced, racial tension, and political division have left all of us with what I would describe as an emotional limp. And by that I just mean no one seems to be doing awesome right now emotionally. And this has so many implications for those of us who are entrusted with the privilege of preaching. And so in our time together on September 19th, I want to talk about how we as preachers can best care for our own hearts as well as preaching to the hurting hearts of those that God has put in our care. We're also going to leave plenty of time for Q&A to tackle any preaching topic on your heart or mind. Now, this is a free event, but space is limited to just 100 people, and it's filling up fast. So do me a favor and head over to expositorscollective.com and register today. I look forward to spending this time with you on September 19th.
Okay, so you heard the man. September 19th is the date, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Go to our website, expositorscollective.com, scroll to the bottom. There's a link there that will take you to the Eventbrite page. Sign up to reserve your spot, and I look forward to seeing you and being there at this training event. Okay, So thank you so much for listening to this extended introduction. Now I'm going to get out of the way and let you enjoy this vintage interview from the summer of 2018. So I'm here with Mark Smith in a very old building in Dublin, surrounded by old books. And what are we here for?
We've been meeting as a group of church planters, aspiring church planters, to think about how we reach Ireland with the gospel, how we establish and grow more churches. So it's an early days conversation. I was really excited that there was representatives from all 4 provinces, and I think that showed a really encouraging degree of unity. And it's the first conversation. It's the first step, and we don't know where it's going to go. But if it encourages people and helps to support people in the act of church planting, then it's been worth it. So that's what we've been doing. There's been about 20 of us today, and we're just finished.
Yeah, I don't come to Dublin often, but it's definitely worth the journey, and it was really encouraging. And as we think about church planting and the need for new churches in this area and even healthy existing churches, somebody was saying downstairs in a session that a church is so much more than just preaching, right? But in this interview, we're going to talk about preaching. So let's say, when did you preach your first sermon?
I think I was about 20 years old, maybe 20, 21. I've been working for a church as an intern for about 9 months or thereabouts. My trainer, the senior pastor there, was like, "Okay, it's time for you to take a swing." An evening service. Wasn't going to kind of unleash me on the morning.
It's the committed few.
Yeah. So it was an evening service, and it was John 3, and it did not go well.
Okay. Why not? Or do you think it didn't go well, but everyone else thought it was fine? Or
no, so it didn't go well
objectively
because of the feedback that was given. So immediately after the service. So it's John 3. It was about 35 minutes in a 20-minute church.
Oh.
And I was kind of 20 years old and angry, and I thought, well, screw them. I'm just going to, they're going to hear me, and I'm going to preach as long as I like. Yeah, so a guy comes up to me straight after the sermon, after I've preached for 35 minutes. He's an older guy, a retired clergyman, and he looks me dead square in the eyes, and in all seriousness, he says, "John Stott can preach for 35 minutes." And he turns around and he walks away. I was like, okay, fair enough. And so not my boss, but one of the other pastors there, his feedback, afterwards is like, "Your voice was just so annoying."
Oh.
Because I had just kind of, slipped into or imbibed this kind of preaching cadence that just really grated on people. And it was, it was self-indulgent. There was loads of extempore stuff that didn't need to be in there. I got down from the pulpit thinking that I absolutely smashed it.
Yeah.
And I was brought swiftly back down to earth by people around me.
Wow. Yeah, I think to preach that long is like, it's a privilege, not a right. And I think as your peer or your buddy or that fellow in the church saying that, John Stott can do that, doesn't necessarily mean that you can. Once I was a guest preacher at a church, and I preached for 67 minutes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
67 minutes. Yeah. And I just, the Lord put all this stuff on my heart, and I needed to say it all. But I think that, I could have said all of that in a far less time.
When you're saying 27thly that it's going
to. Well, that's not good. So that was your first one, and I'm glad that you got a chance to have a second. Was there kind of patterns of I guess I've listened to you preach now, never in person, but I've listened to the City Church podcast, and you preach for longer than 35 minutes now, don't you? Or thereabouts?
Yeah, so it's normally landing around about 40. When we started City, I was going much longer than that. So
okay.
I was touching an hour, and I've gotten shorter. It's never shorter than 35. I have reasons for that, but yeah, that's where I normally come in on. Something like.
Okay, so going from 35 bad minutes, and then you kind of reduce that. And now you're kind of you're breathing in and then breathing out, so the chest is getting smaller and then bigger. What were the things that you learned to kind of edit out from your messages to get them short? And then I'd love to hear what are the sort of things that maybe you're adding into it to make them long again.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between in your study of the text. There's a difference between what you would consider scaffolding, and do I need to speak up?
Probably.
Okay, so do you want me to start that bit again?
Yeah.
Okay. I think one of the things that I learned is that when you're working through a text and when you're doing all your text work and all your commentary work, that there are things that you see in there in the text or in the commentaries that's just gold stuff, gold dust stuff, but it doesn't cycle necessarily around the main point of the passage. And I think one of the things that I've learned to do is to kill my darlings on a Friday. That there's stuff that's really kind of the Lord has kind of shown me, or that's really excited me, but it's not actually the main drive of the passage. And if you were to just put all that stuff in, people would just come away the sermon would be bloated and people would come away feeling bloated, kind of like you've got indigestion. And so it's having that kind of refining things round the big idea, and yeah, like I say, killing your darlings, being judicious about what you're going to include, rather than just kind of stream of consciousness and sticking everything in. And I mean, one of the other things that does that is that I don't have a full manuscript anymore. Like I jettisoned full manuscript, when we started City Church, and I preach off a mind map now, which has a very kind of not a very specific. It used to have a very specific structure, and now it's kind of a little bit more fluid, but around similar sorts of principles, which we can talk about. But that's really helped me, not feel like I have to kind of throw everything at it, because there's stuff that I've forgotten because it's not all written down.
Okay, so only the stuff worth remembering gets remembered.
Yeah, well, the stuff that's worth remembering is probably the only stuff that I'm writing down.
Okay.
I'm trusting the Lord to let me forget the other stuff. I'm not quite sure.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'd love to hear more about this mind map, or the transition from a manuscript to a mind map.
Yeah.
Ideally, if we can get like a picture of one of your mind maps, maybe we could put it in the show notes.
Yeah, that's no problem. I mean, so the seminary that I studied at in London, a place called Oak Hill, the vice principal was the guy who taught homiletics, and he was also one of the guys who helped to establish the kind of gold standard preaching training course in London. And when he started on staff at Oak Hill, he started with a blank piece of paper. He left all that behind, and he went right back to first principles. And when he taught us homiletics, it was very much a kind of, here are some things that you might jive with, that may sit with you, rather than here's the one model that you need to follow, that A, B, C, D, do it like this, put it in through the grinder, and out comes your sermon. Yeah. And it just so happened that one of the things that he kind of laid at us was this mind map, or this kind of roadmap is probably a better way of putting it, and it comes It comes actually from Andy Stanley's book, Communicating for Change. Now,
Okay.
obviously, you have theological, differences with Andy Stanley, but when it comes to kind of thinking through how to communicate a text, I think he's got a lot of wisdom. And so our professor helped us go through that book, and the mind map has 5 distinct sections to it, and it runs like this. It's me, you, God, you, we. Me, you, God, you, we. And how those work themselves out is that me and you are those are the introductory comments about a text. You're, rather than just thinking, I need to tell a funny story, and then say Jesus is a bit like that, isn't he? And now I'm in the main exposition. What the me and you does, it's how does the big idea of the text, or as Brian Chappell would call it, the fallen condition focus, how does that resonate with you as the preacher? Because what that does, which I think is crucially important, especially for us in a kind of progressive urban setting, is that it shows the people that are around you that you're not some sort of disconnected from reality robot, that you actually understand real world difficulties and challenges. And it leads into the youth section, where you're establishing that this is the gospel makes sense of this area of your life, or here's an issue that we all have to deal with and confront. And the gospel offers us the resources and the means for doing that. And so, if that's something that resonates with you, you need to listen to what God is saying. Because one of the crucial pieces of advice that I would give to anybody starting out in preaching is, don't assume a hearing anymore.
Yeah.
We've just been talking downstairs, and one of the comments that has come up repeatedly, in those passages in different contexts, is how the world has moved on from seeing Christianity at the centre and has pushed it to the margins. It used to be, that the parsons and clergymen and pastors, they were the centre of the Christian community, and their mere speaking, by virtue of their office, was authoritative.
Right.
That's no longer the case. We can't assume a hearing. We've got to earn people's trust. We've got to earn that we know what people are feeling, what people are thinking, and what people are going through, and then say, look how the gospel applies to that. And that's what the me and you does. That's what it begins to establish. Yeah. Then the God section, that's your kind of more standard. That's your exposition. You kind of you exegete, illustrate, apply type section of the text. And so we still want to be doing that, all of those great kind of exegetical principles of letting the text speak for itself, of illustrating, of doing that hard work. And then coming out of that, the you and the we are 2 dimensions of application. The you application is the specific individual application of the text. And it's trying to make sure that that's insightful and that lands and not just kind of hovers over. It's kind of the Monday morning test. What are you going to do tomorrow morning in light of this? But I think the last one is perhaps even more crucial, because the letters of the New Testament were written to churches. They were written to communities. And so it's thinking about, how does this apply to us as a body, as a collective? Or put it another way, so for us in City Church, is asking the question, how would City Church be different if we believe this text? How would we look and think and feel differently as a church if this was true and we applied it to who we are as a body? And so when I first started in City Church, I would get a huge A3 art pad and different coloured post-it notes, and I would literally write me, you, God, you, we down the left-hand side, and I would post-it note along the landscape.
Sorry, in your study or on Sunday morning?
No, honestly.
Oh, okay.
So in my prep on Sunday morning, I would literally do that. And post-it notes were great because there'd be things that you'd want to move around, and I could do it like that. That's how I started. Now I just do it all on a mind map onto my iPad. I use an application called MindNote, and it syncs with my MacBook, and that's what I bring into the pulpit.
Yeah. Well, and so I'm unfamiliar with this. I haven't read Andy Stanley's book, but so of these 5 points, me, you, God, you, we, I'm assuming that not each of these gets equal airtime. Is that right?
Oh yeah, no, and it changes. It changes with every given Sunday.
Okay.
I mean, this works for me, and it is not a master. It's a servant. So sometimes the we section, the file section, it isn't really fully developed, and it could be more so. Sometimes I need a longer introduction because I need to do a longer kind of run up.
Okay.
Sometimes it doesn't need to be quite so long because it's the main principle is fall and condition focus is more easily illustrated, and so it's kind of it's a broad principle. It's a servant of the text and not a master over it, and so it's not kind of 6 minutes for this, 6 minutes for this, 6 minutes for this, 6 minutes for this. The God section is invariably longer.
Yes, of course,
because that's where your 3 points all beginning with P are.
Mm-hmm.
I don't do that. Don't do that.
Oh, I just started doing that. It's great.
Yeah, you're kidding me.
I'm not.
Oh man. Okay. We had a Christian actor come in. So he's reasonably famous in certain circles. He'd come into college to do like a very practical communication workshop, and that's kind of where I lost my apparently irritating preaching voice. And he always used to kind of bang on about 3 points beginning with P, and one of the things being that we want the big idea of the text to be sticky.
Sure.
And he was basically making the case that alliteration isn't actually sticky. We think it might be, but it's not. And we need to find like other ways of making it sticky.
Well, see, I'm trying to prove you wrong right now by recalling the last time that I did a 3-point alliteration, so I could say, no, listen, I did it, and actually I can't remember my own. Now, granted, I haven't preached for 2.5 weeks, so maybe it's hard for me to reach back. But I was the one who wrote them. I made the slides.
The power, the purpose, and the persistence of prayer.
You bust out the thesaurus a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, I'll reconsider it. So we're all works in progress.
Going back to what Chris Green did with us, it's kind of this might jive with you. 3 points all begin with P might be perfect in your context. It might right fit where you're with your personality type. I'm just sharing with what works for me. One of the other things that he presented to people, which a couple of guys kind of picked up on, was why don't you think about in terms of your sermon prep? Why don't you think about two movements or like a double heartbeat of what is the text saying about what is the case and what's it saying about what could be, and so you're constantly moving from what is to what could be, and back and forward to that. That doesn't kind of, my brain doesn't go there naturally.
Yeah.
But that can work with some people.
Yeah.
3 points beginning with P works with you, fine.
It's a recent innovation for me. The novelty is maybe going to wear off. But it sounds like when you talk about you and we, especially that we aspect, isn't that almost like a preferred vision of the future?
Yeah.
To say like, hey, City Church, if we really, drank this in deeply and lived this out, it would look like this.
Yeah.
So that's you talking about what could be. Mm-hmm. As you say, but right now we're not. We're this, we're that, but we could be this. Mm-hmm. That's great. So moving on that, talking about like contextualization and then talking about City Church Dublin, I've listened to, I'd say at least 4 messages from you
Okay.
I mean, your Foundations series, which was kind of based on the 5 solas, only not all 5 of them.
Yeah.
Frustratingly so for me, because I was,
did you preach all 5?
I did.
All right, okay.
I did. So I listened to that, and then I think something from 1 Peter as well. And as I listened along, like what I just could not escape was like, you are preaching to Dublin people. You are like speaking, you are illustrating your points, you are making references to like contemporary Dublin life. Like it's not a generic sermon. Like it wouldn't like it kind of wouldn't work in Dallas, Texas, or in London. Like you are speaking to contemporary Dublin.
Yeah.
Is that intentional, or does that just happen?
No, it doesn't just happen. I think it is intentional. I think you want to be both exegeting the text and your context. I was educated in a seminary that put a high value on contextualization, and you could. Yeah, so I was taught by a guy called Dan Strange, who you could Google and read some of the works of. Basically, if you were to pick up the European copy of Tim Keller's Centered Church, he's the one who writes the essay responses. Okay. And I know there's a bit of debate about kind of the whole contextualization movement and whether or not that's even necessary. You just preach the gospel and let the Spirit do its work. And if you're preaching in English, you're contextualizing. The only question then really is, are you contextualizing well or poorly? And so I want to be thinking about what are some of the sensibilities, what are some of the objections, and this is kind of a crucial one for me. What's the plausibility structure of the kind of the 25-year-old Dubliner or student coming to study in Dublin, because that's who we've got on a Sunday morning. What do they just assume to be true that actually we need to see that the gospel both undermines and fulfills, and having that kind of, or subverts and fulfills? What are some of the things that they desire? And the idols of any culture, that like across the world, they're not all that different. It's acceptance, intimacy, comfort, a sense of place in the world. I was thinking about, okay, where do Dubliners look for the answer to those? What are the crackpots that they are going to for those things? That's the Jeremiah 2 idea of, 2 sins my people have committed. They have turned from me, the fount of living water, and turned to cisterns that are broken and that can hold no water. And so it's like, what are the cisterns, what are the crackpots that Dubliners are going to, and running that through logically and showing how that actually doesn't ultimately satisfy, and then saying, look over here, here's a fount of living water that will satisfy the deepest needs and longings of your hearts. And that's fundamental. That's not a felt needs gospel in that kind of superficial sense. Yeah. It's about showing that the gospel actually makes sense of all of life. It's not just your ticket to ride when you die. That it's actually the place of greatest human flourishing. That when somebody becomes a believer in Jesus, they become truly human, and it's showing the goodness of that. So many pastors and preachers in churches, they preach the lordship of Jesus, and that is absolutely crucial. But as soon as you do that, you need to preach the goodness of the lordship of Jesus. We will all of us will submit to an authority. The only question is whether or not that authority leads to our good and to our flourishing. And it's making a case that actually Christianity does do that.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. And so the fountain of living water is always the same. It's always Christ and His gospel and His goodness. But it sounds like what you're saying is that in Dublin, the cracked pots are going to be distinct than they would be in Manchester or in Singapore. Yeah. And then even in Dublin in 2018, they'd be different than Dublin in 1918. And so you as a preacher are trying to A, exegete the text, and then B, exegete 2018 Dublin. Is that it?
Yeah.
And how like, with your responsibilities, like with like a recently planted and a growing church and with a growing family, how do you exegete Dublin? What do you do to do that? Because you're not from here.
No, so I was born. Yeah, I was born in the Republic. So I was born about an hour north of here. But my accent's a Northern Irish accent. My parents divorced when I was young, and Mum and I moved to a little town outside Belfast, and that's where I grew up. That's where I came to faith. But very quickly, when feeling the call to ministry, it was always a call back, quote unquote, home.
Okay.
To the Republic, and so I went to London to seminary with the express view of being somewhere in the Republic, and what London did is clarified that I wanted to be in an urban context.
Okay.
That if I went somewhere that didn't have a decent Wi-Fi connection and independent coffee shop, that I'd probably die. And so that limited my options.
Yeah.
And so to get back to your question, how do you exegete Dublin? You talk to Dubliners. You talk to people that are living in Dublin, both Christian and non. Like when I'm, a bit like what the guys were sharing downstairs about kind of having regular rhythms. Like I go to the same coffee shop, and I know Andy there, I know Tom there, I know those baristas.
Yeah.
I know the kind of things that they value, that they prioritize. They're highly progressive, liberal, materialist, in the sense of there's nothing beyond the material world. Not that they're kind of
not greedy.
That they're all about the dollar. And you just kind of, and sometimes they're even serving prepping there, and you kind of have a conversation about what do you think about this. So that's one way. Read. Who are the culture makers and shapers in the particular city that you're in? So for Dublin, it's a social media group called Love in Dublin. The guys who post in there have a huge following amongst millennials in Dublin, and so for example, with the repealing of the Eighth Amendment and the ushering in of abortion legislation, all of the arguments and from the pro-abortion side, they're all being articulated on there, and so it's engaging with that. Fintan O'Toole writing in the Irish Times, kind of more older guy more generally, but again, just kind of he is he's a culture maker in that sense. He articulates the modern liberal sensibilities that Irish people aspire to. David McWilliams had his blog. He'd be another person who's very good at exegeting culture, and so when it comes to kind of those guys, I'm just kind of standing on their shoulders. And so reading, talking to people, being out and about in the city, having regular rhythms, going to the same sorts of places, talking to the same sorts of people, getting to know them beyond the "can I have a latte, please?"
Yeah. We don't have a TV in our house, and we just watch Netflix through the and I just found myself, once we've got that Netflix subscription or got someone else's password with it was just like, oh great, I'm from the US originally, so is my wife, and we could watch our favorite shows. And we just got in this rhythm of just like watching TV shows we grew up with, more American stuff, and that's cutting off from some of what our neighbors are watching. And then it's so possible with social media to have this curated newsfeed that brings you all the stuff that you're interested. But I try to intentionally, I guess, read Cork writers, people writing about the city that I live in. The person who runs Love in Cork is a neighbor of mine. She lives four doors down, and so it's really good to pick up, I guess, what is the city as it actually is, not what I wish it was or what it used to be. Or I like how when you were talking about exegeting Dublin, you didn't mention James Joyce. You didn't mention these literary giants, I suppose, that perhaps are valuable, but that they have a particular snapshot of a certain time.
I don't think I've ever quoted James Joyce in a sermon. Not that I wouldn't.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there would be some really useful fodder in there. But it's not where... I mean, we've got nobody over 43 in City Church. You go to the James Joyce Festival here, I think it happens every autumn. And there are a few people under 43 there, so it's just not kind of where we're at. The other thing that we do that I should mention is we use meetups really effectively. So meetups.com is a kind of a...
Yeah, you told me about that, yeah.
Kind of a getting together. So basically, you go on to meetups, you can kind of sign up for a free account, or there's kind of various levels that you pay for. Anyway, the point being, you say, I'm going to be in this place and I want to talk about this thing. Are you interested in that? And so I went on meetups, set up an account, was very open and said, look, I'm a pastor in the church. I would like to have a deep and meaningful conversation. That's what we call it. We call it deep and meaningful. I want to have a deep and meaningful conversation over a beer. You can set the agenda. Let's talk. Thinking that it would be, me and two other guys kind of huddled around a pint in a corner of some snug in Dublin. And first week, 26 people showed up.
Wow.
And something like 400 kind of members of that group now. Now 400 people don't show up all the time, but there's a desire there to talk about stuff of significance. So these 26 people show up and they're all looking at me going, hey, so what are we talking about tonight? And I was like, I don't know.
Wow.
I wanted the people who showed up to set the agenda, but you can't have 26 people setting the agenda. And so we began to kind of formalize it a little bit more. And I think I can't remember what we talked about the first night, but the second time we kind of said, why don't you... So we called it the most dangerous idea. So come with the most dangerous idea that you can think of, that if it were implemented would be good for our society. And that kind of people really rose to the challenge. Some people saying, we need to have a market for the free sale of human organs because there's such a transplant need. And so if people could if that could just be. If we could get over our kind of distaste to that, and, there's a dangerous idea, but it would be good for society. And then, of course, so other people are kind of talking about this, that, and the other thing, and then it kind of comes around, in my table, you had another Christian guy leading, and it comes to me, and say, well, so what's your most dangerous idea? I think the most dangerous idea that ever was is that Jesus actually rose bodily from the dead in history. And I think that is really dangerous because it is drawn a line between all of humanity. But if that was something that you implemented, i.e. that you believed in, it would be really good for you. And I was able to kind of and that's the thing, I think in that particular evening, you weren't just stating a dangerous idea, you had to actually advocate for the goodness of it. And so I kind of stacked the deck a little bit. Another evening I kind of sent out some pre-reading. I think it was an interview that Tim Keller did with the New York Times just right before Christmas, and I was like, let's read this and then have a drink and talk about it. Some guys are showing up thinking, saying, this guy's an idiot, he's an intellectual lightweight, and I'm sitting there kind of slightly dying inside. But we're able to have a conversation about that. So I find meetups really effective in that regard, and it's to say there are people who want to have a conversation, and it's the real payoff. I know I'm rambling now, I'll finish. The payoff from the meetups, it's not the night in itself, it's the individual that you talk to at the end when you're heading to the bus stop or to the train, who's like, do you want to grab a coffee? And you get to pick up cultivate a friendship, start an actual discipleship relationship. That's the payoff of doing the meetup. Not sitting with a dozen other folks, because I lose. Like if I'm the only Christian there, I go 12 rounds of those guys, and intellectually, philosophically, I am the loser. I never ever win the debate. But that's not the win. The win is the one person who's like, let's get a coffee. And that's why I do it. Go home exhausted.
I bet,
but it's the one person.
Well, and thank you for
Sorry for that diet.
No, that's
right.
Yeah. And that's so there's the evangelistic benefits from that, but then you would also say that feeds into, Mark as
Do you know, you'd be surprised at how often I get that.
Really?
Yeah, people, and I wonder, is it because of my Northern Irish accent and how I say Mark? Because it can sometimes sound like Martin, so don't be embarrassed at all. People call me Martin all the time.
Well, the first time I met you, I think I got it wrong, and then I've been trying, don't say Martin, don't say Martin, don't say Martin, and so...
You're like Father Dougal, Len.
Oh, hey, Len.
Yeah.
So this helps you, we'll edit that out, or you won't, who knows. So that helps you, I guess, for that evangelistic encounter.
Yeah.
And obviously that person as well, not just you. But you were saying that helps you to be, I guess, a person who's able to understand thoughts, concerns, motives of the people in your city.
Yeah, because it's actually, because in your preaching then, what you're doing on a Sunday morning is you're answering the objections of an actual real person and not creating a straw man. Because the easiest thing in the world is to create an unnuanced caricature of what you think the secular pagan is, and then take that down. And it's much easier to take down. But if you're kind of bringing in some of the nuance, some of the complexities, as far as you're able to, and kind of like a monologue like that, but at least showing that you're willing to kind of engage with that. When you seek to demonstrate the gospel answer, it's much more plausible because it's not just attacking a caricature.
Yeah. And then here's kind of a tangent or hypothetical. Have you ever, I guess, encountered that and then used that in a sermon illustration or illustrated point, and then the person that you're speaking about is in the room or hears about it or might object to being an illustration in your sermon? And did you get their GDPR position to share their data?
Yeah, that's right. I'm trying to think, has that ever happened?
Because I know there's a great power in sharing personal stories, but then oftentimes when it's not only your story, there's a risk then that you're sharing someone else's vulnerability.
Yeah.
Hey, someone wanted for coffee afterwards, and you'll never believe the illness that he has, and you tell that story in such a way that compromises that relationship or violates that trust.
Yeah, no. If it was somebody who shared like a confidential thing, like an illness or a pastoral issue, I'm not gonna cheapen it by kind of using it as kind of sermon fodder. I think I'm probably gonna operate. When it's for illustrative purposes in a sermon, I'm going to operate more on the principle level, on the kind of. So I'll still probably say, some of you may be thinking X, Y, and Z, and maybe the person's there who's kind of brought that to my mind, and it just so happens that they're caught up within the some of you who think this way, and I happen to know that, but not kind of I was chatting to. Chatting to Bob the pagan the other day, who happens to be here. Hey Bob, you and I were having a conversation. Let me tell you from the front how wrong you were. It's one kind of level. It's one level removed from that. I think there's been one instance where there was a good chance that the person might be there, and I've texted them saying, thinking about the conversation that we had, I think it could be really useful on Sunday. Do you mind if I kind of share some of what we talked about?
Yeah.
And they were fine with that. I mean, it wasn't kind of disclosing deepest, darkest. But yeah,
Okay, yeah, fantastic. I'd love to talk for a lot longer. I have a train to catch. Do you have a kind of a final word for people that are beginning to preach, or that they might have just preached their first sermon and it was bad, and they wanted it to be so much better, and they just hope that they never get asked again? What would you say to them?
I would say hold to what is good. If you've got negative feedback is helpful. and it's a good coaching tool. I think where possible, you know, this is more the kind of a person who would give feedback. If you were giving feedback to a completely new person who was setting out and preaching, you probably want to hear them more than once, because you want to kind of discern patterns of behaviour in preaching and critique that, and not just. The alternative is you end up just kind of moving the goalpost here, there, and everywhere, and the new preacher just gets kind of totally disoriented. You want to hear them a couple of times, kind of say, over these 2-3 sermons, I've noticed that you do this. Let's talk about that. So that's something kind of for sermon critiquing. For new preachers, I think I could probably give lots of things. One thing. Commentaries are not teachers, they're consultants. And so what I would say is, when you're doing your text work, write down questions to ask the commentaries. Questions about stuff that you're confused about. What does this word mean in this context? Is this the right way to apply that? Have specific questions that you take to the commentaries, and therefore you use the commentaries judiciously, because it's like you're going to your advisory board and asking a specific question to them. The alternative is that you just read the kind of the 20 pages that D.A. Carson or Karen Jobes or whoever has written on a particular section. And then you can't think outside of that. You want to just come and say, does this commentator answer my question on this? Yes. What is the answer? Move on. Don't just read huge swathes. Don't just listen to one preacher. You'll become a robot or a parrot. Don't listen to just 2 preachers. You'll become confused. Listen to a multiplicity and cut yourself some slack. You'll find your own voice, and that'll just take time. Like I don't think I've hit my stride. I don't think I've found my voice in preaching. This is a ridiculous thing that you might have asked me. You have asked me to talk about preaching 5 years in on my pastoral ministry. I'm still working out what works for me. I'm still working out what my voice is in terms of preaching, how to sharpen what I do. But that's the thing about sermon prep and about preaching. It's an art and not a science, and it just takes time to kind of build that craft. And so, if you've been knocked down, get back up, learn from it what you can, listen to people, read things, get back up off the mat, and give yourself the time to cultivate and find your voice.
Wow. Well, thank you once again, Mark, for your time. And even though I was in the room and even though I was half of the conversation, it's been more than 2 years, so I forgot most of this. So to be able to listen in again, what an enjoyable time. So now I have your reminder to get signed up for the webinar, expositorscollective.com, scroll to the bottom, click that link and get registered for our webinar on preaching to the heart, featuring Ryan Hughley. So sign up for that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get out of the way, and we're going to have one of the participants from our earlier webinar that started in the very beginning of lockdown. We had Brian Broderson and David Guzik speaking about spirit-led preaching. And so here I'm going to have a guest, somebody who signed up and participated in that Zoom webinar, speaking about their experience of it. And then immediately following is a preview for episode 126. I had a great conversation with Adam Narciso about the need for prayer, about the need for us to truly engage, not just with the text, but the God of the text. And so episode 126 is going to be fantastic. And so I'm going to leave you with an extended preview of next Tuesday's episode. All right. I hope that this episode, I hope that the webinar, I hope that all that we do here at the Expositors Collective helps you to grow in your personal study and your public proclamation of God's Word.
Hey everyone, my name is Ricky Ponte and I'm from Cork, Ireland, and I want to take this opportunity just to encourage you guys to come along to the next Expositors Collective webinar. The last one I really enjoyed and was super encouraged just by all just the great teaching that was there. And not only that, but I think one of the things that really stuck out to me and made it real memorable was the opportunities that we had just to connect with one another, because it really gave me just a chance to see what God is doing and just really all over the world. And it was just amazing seeing and hearing people's stories of how the Word of God is changing lives in the different areas that people are ministering to. And so for me, that was one of the definitely highlights of it, and I'm really looking forward to joining again this time.
While I've been trained to prepare sermons, both topical and exegetical sermons, and I can do that in a traditional approach to preparation, for me, preparation is not in a moment. Preparation is a lifestyle. Preparation is the lifestyle I've given myself to that leads to the fruit of the ministry God's given me. I think of John the Baptist, who himself prepared presumably 30 years, as a Nazirite, taking his vow, growing his hair, wearing these uncomfortable clothes, this wild diet of locusts and honey, living in the wilderness, removed from the religious community of his day. And what did he have? He had 6 months worth of public ministry. 30 years of sowing into connection with God in secret place, time with him, knowing the scripture, praying the words, speaking the word, singing the word as any first century Jew would. For 6 months of ministry. What if we think about preparation a little bit wrong? We think of preparation in terms of moments. I want to propose preparation as a lifestyle.